In my previous life, to keep me from being sent back to the countryside, my parents arranged for both me and Grace Miller, the girl they had mistakenly raised as their daughter, to be married off at the same time. Grace was weak and timid, always carrying a deep sense of guilt toward me. She chose to marry Ethan Thompson, the youngest son of the director of Thompson Textile Mill, a notorious playboy. I was looked down on by my entire husband's family, while Grace grew more and more frail. She was even constantly tormented by Ethan's so-called childhood sweetheart for no reason. In the end, she fell down the stairs and lost both her life and her unborn child. As for me, I had grown up in the countryside chasing chickens and scaring dogs, hot-tempered and straightforward. I married Nathan Cole, a political commissar, but that upright soldier couldn't tolerate my stinginess and sharp tongue. I, on the other hand, thought he was old-fashioned, dry, and rigid with endless rules. We gradually grew tired of each other and eventually divorced in cold indifference. On the day of the divorce, I was hit by a speeding truck and died instantly. When I opened my eyes again, I had returned to the day the engagement was being arranged. Grace and I looked at each other, unable to utter a word. After a long moment, I didn't hesitate. I directly snatched the household registry from the hands of the mill director's wife, who wanted one of us to marry her son, Ethan Thompson. "My daughter, he just came home," my mother said anxiously. "You don't even know what Ethan Thompson is like. The Thompson family is complicated, and there's even a bedridden grandmother. If you marry into that house, you'll suffer a lot." Back then, my mother had taken me out and lost me, only finding me again 15 years later. Because of that, she always carried guilt, and couldn't bear letting me suffer even the slightest hardship. Grace, head lowered, hands twisting nervously, her lips trembling in fear, still forced herself to speak. "Sis, let me marry Ethan Thompson. You should marry Nathan Cole." I let out a cold laugh. No one is going to stop me from marrying Ethan Thompson. I liked him the moment I saw him. After all, the engagement with the Thompson family originally belonged to the real daughter of the Manning family. No matter what, it should have been mine. Clutching the household registry tightly, my eyes curved with a deep, eager smile. A frivolous playboy like him was, of course, a perfect match for someone like me, the bold and unruly girl from the countryside. In the previous life, Grace married Ethan Thompson. Ethan had never been able to stand her frail, flower-like appearance and showed his disgust openly. Her mother-in-law disliked her as well, forcing her to do all the household chores, cooking, washing, everything, while also caring for the bedridden grandmother. No one in the Thompson family treated her kindly. Even Ethan made her go to the hospital to take care of his injured childhood sweetheart. She worked herself to exhaustion during the day, and at night she was tormented at the hospital. In the end, her spirit collapsed, and she fell down the stairs and died, taking her unborn child with her. As for me, after marrying Nathan Cole, although he was excessively upright and my mother-in-law was a typical gentle Southern woman who always spoke softly, neither of them had ever treated me badly. I lacked nothing materially. We were simply incompatible. He liked quiet, I loved noise. He spoke gently. My voice was loud like a bell. He said I was too noisy and wanted me to sit quietly and read, while I felt he was unbearably dull, repeating the same old things every day. I wanted to secretly run a small business to improve our life, but not only did he stop me, he nearly reported me himself. If my mother-in-law hadn't intervened, he might have dragged me away on the spot. We argued endlessly until we could no longer live together. We divorced peacefully. I thought that after the divorce I could finally do whatever I wanted. But only a few days after celebrating my newly gained freedom, I was struck by a truck and died instantly. Now that I have been reborn, I quietly vowed to myself, this time, I will not harm Nathan Cole. When I thought about Nathan Cole and that gentle mother-in-law of mine from the past, my chest tightened for a moment. "All right, Lisa, if that's truly your decision, then go register the marriage tomorrow," my mother said. She let out 2 helpless sighs, exchanged a glance with the mill director's wife, and the two quietly left the room. The marriage between me and Ethan Thompson was essentially settled. Grace clutched my hand tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Sis, the Thompson family isn't a good place. You shouldn't." "For now, that's not certain," I said, tightening my grip, my expression calm. I knew she always carried guilt toward me, and from the way she reacted when hearing Ethan's name, I was almost certain she had been reborn as well. I wasn't someone who could be bullied. Soon enough, she would see the retribution the Thompson family would have to face. Grace froze. "Sis, you also came back?" I nodded. She immediately threw her arms around me and sobbed uncontrollably. After she finished crying, she told me every detail of what she had suffered in the Thompson family. The next morning, Ethan Thompson and Nathan Cole arrived at my house early. Grace and I changed into new clothes, and each of us walked toward our respective future husbands. After registering the marriage, I went home with Ethan. I shut the courtyard gate behind us without hesitation. The moment we stepped into the house, I saw my new mother-in-law, Helen Song, sitting upright on a chair. She raised her eyebrows and said irritably, "Why are you only coming back now?" Ethan walked in and tossed the marriage certificate onto her lap. "Mom, we had to stand in line." Helen Song immediately shot to her feet and marched straight toward me. "Why would you marry someone like this? Some girl from the countryside? A low-born girl like you, and you dare step into the Thompson family's house? Kneel." As she spoke, she raised her hand, about to jab a finger at my forehead. In my previous life, Grace had suffered the exact same thing. Back then, Helen had even cursed her, calling her a filthy imposter who dared step into their home. Grace had been so terrified that she burst into tears, and Helen took that chance to kick her. Grace fell to the ground and collapsed into a kneel, never able to straighten her back again in that household. But this time, I watched her hand coming toward me and immediately raised my own, grabbing her fingers. With a sharp crack, I broke them without hesitation. You dare do that to me?" Helen screamed so loudly it shook the roof. Neighbors started gathering outside the gate, eager to watch the scene unfold. Both Ethan and his mother stood frozen, shocked that I had struck first. When they finally regained their senses, they lunged toward me together. "You hit my mother!" Ethan shouted, swinging his hand at me. "I'll teach you what respect means." Helen screamed as she grabbed a broom and swung it toward me. I seized Ethan's arm. Two cracking sounds rang out as both his hands dropped helplessly. Ethan howled in agony. The broom in Helen's hand was already in mine before she even realized what had happened. "You," she stuttered. I smiled. "Mother-in-law, this is our first meeting. I hope you're satisfied with this little gift." Before she could say another word, I swung the broom and struck her thigh hard. She screamed and collapsed onto the floor. "Now," I said, narrowing my eyes at the two of them, "can you sit quietly and listen to me?" The two were trembling so violently their whole bodies twitched, but they still instinctively went silent. At this moment, I must have looked like a demon crawling out of a grave. They couldn't fight back, couldn't resist, and could only submit. "What do you want?" Ethan asked, his voice shaking. "First of all, this marriage doesn't just keep me from being sent to the countryside, it does the same for you. So in this mutually beneficial arrangement, don't act like I'm the only one taking advantage of you. I know everything about how you treated her. Understand?" Ethan's voice trembled. "You married into the Thompson family. You're part of this family now. You should be a good wife. We're supposed to live properly together. You should put up with things so our family can live peacefully. Why don't I remember?" Ethan Thompson pressed his lips together, his lower lip trembling slightly. "I have hundreds of ways to deal with you people," I said calmly. "Let me show you a little appetizer first." Then I stepped in front of him and grabbed both of his dislocated arms, snapping them back into place with a sharp twist. I returned to where I had been standing and shoved the broom into his hands. After that, I straightened up, pulled out a few makeup items I had prepared beforehand from my pocket, and quickly brushed them across my face. My pale skin instantly turned into a blotchy mess of purple bruises, with even a smear of blood at the corner of my mouth. Ethan was stunned, and Helen Song froze as well. "What are you doing?" Helen asked, her voice shaking. I beamed at them. "Aren't you two very good at twisting the truth and turning black into white? Then let me give you a taste of that feeling." I grabbed each of them by the arm, dragged both Ethan and Helen toward the door, and shoved them outside. Before they could regain their balance, I rushed ahead and flung the courtyard gate wide open. Then I burst into loud sobs. Mom, please don't hit me anymore. Please, I really know I was wrong. Mom, I just entered the house. I didn't know our family rule was to kneel from the doorway. I was only a little late, and you told Ethan to hit me. Ethan, I know I'm lowborn. I know marrying you is a blessing from my past life. You're the son of a factory director, and I'm just a country girl. I'm marrying above my station. From now on, I'll take good care of you. Dad-in-law is the god of this family. I'll remember everything Mom taught me. I wailed and dragged out my words dramatically, loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. A large crowd of neighbors had already gathered outside the gate. Now, they all stood completely still. Kneel at the door the moment you enter. Blessing from a past life. Father-in-law is a god. When those phrases were put together, the whole thing sounded horrifying. Helen screamed and lunged toward me, trying to cover my mouth. I immediately collapsed to my knees, shaking all over. Shut up right now. What nonsense are you spouting? She shouted. Her voice frantic and almost out of control. Her expression was so vicious, it could scare anyone. A neighbor woman stepped out and pulled her back. Helen, calm down. No matter what, she's your daughter-in-law. Even if you're going to discipline her, you should at least be gentle. That's right. Why would you say things like that? Isn't it embarrassing, Director Thompson? Another chimed in. I think we need to report this to the women's union, someone else added. Or maybe call the neighborhood committee. Helen shook with anger. She's the one who beat us. She broke both my son's arms. We're the ones getting bullied, and somehow she's turning it around on us. Everyone turned to look at Ethan Thompson, who was still holding the broom in his hands. It was as if lightning struck Ethan from the side, his mind spinning, his thoughts scrambling. Then he stepped forward and dropped to his knees in front of me with a loud thud. Honey, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I swear nothing like this will ever happen again. I promise. Let's go home, okay? Stop disturbing the neighbors. He might be a playboy, but he wasn't stupid. He didn't care about pride or dignity. Whatever got the job done, he would use. I stared straight into his eyes. Then I reached out and took hold of his arm gently. Ethan stiffened for a moment. Really? I asked softly. Really? I'll listen to you. About today, we've already made a scene. Let's not embarrass ourselves further. Lisa, let's go home, he said through clenched teeth. I gave him a weak, shaky smile. Oh? You'll really listen to everything I say? Ethan gritted his teeth even harder. Yes. Then let's go home. I leaned on his arm and stood up. When no one was looking, I flashed him a bright, dazzling smile. For some reason, Ethan's legs suddenly went weak. He almost couldn't stand. He quickly steadied himself and supported me as we walked back into the house. Behind us, Helen Song stomped her feet in fury. Looks like Ethan really has some brains after all. The talking to his wife so gently and politely. Yeah, it does seem like this whole thing is your mother's doing, one of the neighbors murmured. All this time I thought Director Thompson's family was reasonable. Who knew they had such a vicious mother-in-law? Who knows? Maybe Director Thompson is a different person at home and at the factory. Hey, don't say that. If someone reports this and they come to investigate, it'll be a huge mess. And if they really come to check, the first person they'll question is the new daughter-in-law of the Thompson family. That's right. All she has to do is confirm that talk about gods and blessings from past lives came from the Thompson household. And then... At this moment, Helen Song gradually calmed down. She was spiteful and overbearing, yes, but she had also been the director's wife for many years. She wasn't stupid. Everyone, please don't misunderstand, Helen said with forced politeness. My daughter-in-law and I simply had a disagreement. We argued a little. She must have heard some nonsense somewhere, so she babbled those things just now. Those words did not come from our family. She was furious enough to choke, but she still had to bend her back and explain. If she let the situation spread, it would definitely affect Director Thompson. We've been neighbors for years. You all know what kind of people my family is. The girl is young, her words were foolish. I apologize on her behalf. I hope no one spreads anything unnecessary. Her tone was both soft and threatening, both apologizing and warning, her eyes sweeping across each face as if memorizing who they were. But in times like these, although the neighbors were truly dissatisfied, none of them dared to get involved with the Thompson family. Their background wasn't something ordinary people could mess with. Everyone gave a few polite smiles and then left. Only after that did Helen close the courtyard gate and return inside. The moment she stepped into the house, she nearly choked on her own rage. I was sitting comfortably in the chair she usually used, while Ethan stood next to me, massaging my shoulders. Helen trembled so hard with anger that even the layers of fat around her shook. "Mom," I said casually, "today is the wedding. Could you go to the market and buy some pork for dinner? We can't possibly serve a vegetarian meal to welcome your new daughter-in-law, right?" Ethan instantly played along. "Mom, I'll go with you to the co-op. While you line up, I can stop by the slaughterhouse." Helen gritted her teeth until they creaked. "Honey, which room are we sleeping in tonight?" I asked Ethan, turning my head. "The east room. I'll take you there," he said quickly. Ethan led me to his room. Forget wedding decorations. The place was so filthy, there wasn't even a place to step. Socks and dirty clothes were thrown everywhere in piles. I looked up at him. He immediately blurted out, "I'll clean it." "Mom," Ethan shouted toward the door, "I'm cleaning the room. The co-op and the slaughterhouse, you'll have to go on your own." I crossed my arms, my tone light but leaving no room for refusal. Helen opened her mouth but choked on her words. She was so angry she could burst a lung, yet she didn't dare protest. In the end, she grabbed the money and ration tickets and stormed out, all under my watchful gaze. Ethan picked up each sock and each shirt obediently. "You don't know, that's fine," I said calmly. "If your mother didn't teach you, I will. Just do as I say." Inside, Ethan was screaming in agony, but he didn't dare resist. "Outer clothes go in one basin, underwear in a separate basin. Socks in another," I instructed. "This is torture," Ethan muttered under his breath. I picked up the broom meaningfully. Ethan instantly stiffened, his hands suddenly moving twice as fast. For the next hour, he swept the floor, wiped the table, organized the wardrobe, threw out the trash, mopped the floor, and changed the bed sheets. Whatever he failed to do properly received a dislocated joint, reset afterward, after which he magically did everything correctly. When Helen returned carrying 2 kilos of pork belly, she found her troublemaking son sitting in the courtyard, washing clothes. Seeing her notorious Playboy son now doing laundry and cleaning like a model husband, she was so overwhelmed she nearly cried tears of joy. "I'll cook," I said, stepping forward to take the bag of meat from Helen's hands. Helen's song stiffened. "You're the one cooking?" she asked, suddenly realizing something. Director Thompson, Alan Thompson, would be coming home for lunch today. She must have thought I was scared of him, and was trying to curry favor to make a good impression. Within just a moment, Helen felt as if she had regained the upper hand. I didn't bother paying her any attention. I simply turned toward Ethan. "If you don't wash everything clean, you know the consequences." Ethan's eyes reddened. He lowered his voice. "Yes." I walked straight into the kitchen. Helen was a terrible cook, and she was stingy to the bone, but as the wife of Director Thompson, she always had access to ingredients most families couldn't afford. Even so, she still lived with a miserly mindset. I, on the other hand, was never the type to let myself suffer. An hour later, all the dishes were set out on the table. Glossy braised pork belly shimmering with fat, stir-fried greens with crispy pork bits, a refreshing bowl of cucumber salad, a pot of golden egg drop soup, and a steaming pot of white rice. Helen's eyelids twitched in pain just looking at it. Ethan swallowed hard. Working around the house was exhausting, but having a wife who cooked like this, that was something else. Thankfully, Alan Thompson returned right at that moment. "Helen, lunch smells amazing today," he said cheerfully as he stepped into the house, glancing at his wife, whose expression looked like she had lost her entire grain ration, and then at his tired, wilted son sitting at the table. Finally, his gaze landed on me. "Was all this cooked by Lisa today?" "Yes, sir," I answered politely, smiling meekly. Helen immediately jumped up, and tears spilled from her eyes as she began wailing. "You don't know, Alan. From the moment this girl walked into the house, she turned everything upside down. She even laid hands on her mother-in-law, and she forced Ethan to do all the chores. The clothes and bed sheets drying in the yard, Ethan washed all of them." Alan's face instantly darkened. "Helen's song," he barked. "Watch your mouth." Helen jumped in fear. "Dear, today's situation, it was really just a misunderstanding. Let's eat first." The braised pork won't taste good once it cools. After we finish, I'll talk to you privately. I looked at him and spoke calmly, my tone even and steady. Sir, today was indeed a bit chaotic. We should eat while the food's still warm. After that, I'll explain everything clearly to you. Alan nodded. Helen's eyes widened in disbelief. She never expected that with just a few sentences, Alan would immediately lean to my side. The moment Ethan heard, "Let's eat," his innocent eyes sparkled with joy. I scooped rice into his bowl for him. Ethan accepted it with trembling excitement. "Thank you, honey." Alan shot me another glance. He knew his son too well. For Ethan to behave this obediently, he clearly feared me. A flicker of curiosity crossed his mind. How exactly had I managed to deal with his uncontrollable son? After lunch, Ethan eagerly helped me clear the table and even offered to wash the dishes. Helen couldn't stand watching it anymore and ended up washing them herself. I followed Alan into his study. Standing before someone intelligent and authoritative, I didn't bother to beat around the bush. I told him everything that had happened that day. Alan nodded in satisfaction. "Lisa, you're a smart girl. From now on, I'm entrusting the matters of this household to you. Whatever you do, I'll support it." I knew immediately that Alan Thompson was a man with a brain. Otherwise, he wouldn't be the director of Thompson Textile Mill. He understood too well what his wife and son were like. Having someone who could rein them in was a blessing for him. In my previous life, whenever he was home, Alan had sided with Grace a few times as well. But he was far too busy, constant overtime, constant business trips, so he couldn't take care of his family the way he wanted. "Sir," I said, "aside from your wife and Ethan, may I handle the other relatives in this household however I see fit?" "Yes, and if you ever need my help, just say the word." "Thank you, sir." Alan left the study and went straight back to the factory. I headed to the bedroom for an afternoon nap. Ethan followed right behind me. What should I do now?" he asked nervously. "Open the book on the desk," I said as I lay down. "Read it. When I wake up, I'll check." Ethan Thompson stared at me in shock. He truly hadn't expected that instead of sharing a bed with his wife, he'd be forced to have his reading checked by her. I lifted my eyes lazily. "Read it. Right now." Ethan immediately picked up the book. Helen Song stood outside the bedroom door, trembling with rage as she heard my commanding tone. Absolutely not. She couldn't allow some country girl like me to seize control of the Thompson household. She was determined to call in reinforcements. There was no way she would believe a girl from the countryside could cause real trouble for her. Helen peeked into the room cautiously. After confirming I wasn't paying attention, she slipped quietly into the courtyard. I slept for an hour. When I woke up, I stretched comfortably. Ethan was still sitting at the desk, his head resting on the book as he'd fallen asleep. My eyes narrowed slightly. Right now, Ethan still had a chance to redeem himself. If he behaved, life wouldn't be too hard for him. But if he continued acting as a lackey for evil people, then handling him quietly wouldn't be difficult either. Suddenly, bang! The bedroom door flew open, kicked violently from the outside. Ethan jolted awake in terror and fell hard to the floor. "Who the hell dares kick my door?" I snapped. A middle-aged woman standing at the doorway froze briefly. "Ethan, sweetheart, I didn't mean to scare you. The moment she entered this house, she caused chaos everywhere," she continued dramatically. "All of us, your aunts, uncles, everyone, came here today to support you." This middle-aged woman was Linda Thompson, Alan Thompson's sister, and also Helen Song's most loyal right hand. In my previous life, she had bullied Grace Miller endlessly. She forced Grace to come to her home to do chores, constantly nitpicked her, and criticized her even when she was caring for the bedridden grandmother. I stood up. Ethan crawled up from the floor. He glanced at the relatives crowding outside, then looked at me, clearly torn. He didn't know whose side to take. I strode straight toward the doorway. Ethan's eyes widened as if watching a wild beast charge forward. I raised my hand and slapped Linda across the face, twice. "These two are for Grace Miller," I said coldly. Then I slapped her twice more. "And these two are for myself. You dare kick my door. Are you tired of living?" Linda staggered, stunned. "You dare hit me?" "Didn't I just hit you?" I replied casually. "You little brat. I'll make sure you regret." Linda lunged at me. I kicked her so hard she flew 2 meters back. Then I turned to Ethan. Think very carefully which side you stand on. I'm giving you only one chance to hesitate. Maybe it was my expression, maybe it was the memory of me dislocating his arms. Whatever it was, Ethan's body shook, and he dropped to his knees with a thud. Honey, I'll listen to you. I nodded in satisfaction. Good. Ethan trembled. I walked out of the room slowly. Outside, the aunts and older female relatives erupted into furious yelling the moment they saw Linda get kicked across the courtyard and Ethan kneeling again. Their outrage reached an unprecedented peak. My eyes flicked sideways. I stepped toward the large water tank, grabbed a full basin of water with one hand, and hurled it straight toward the crowd, aiming at Helen's song. The basin slammed into the ground with a deafening thud, stopping less than 4 inches from Helen's head. The force was so great that Helen trembled uncontrollably. Her pants were soaked. She had wet herself in fright. The group of 7 or 8 female relatives immediately backed away. The cowardly ones shut their eyes tight. I curled my lips slightly and flicked my wrist. The basin clattered back into its original spot. The echo rang loudly, like a declaration. So, I said lightly, does anyone else in the Thompson family want to teach me something? I'm free. My eyes swept across every face before landing on Linda. Linda's knees buckled and she collapsed onto her backside. Ah, dear daughter-in-law, we only came to visit you. You're the new wife and we're the elders, so... Oh? I raised an eyebrow. So the Thompson family's rule is that elders visit the new daughter-in-law empty-handed? No gifts? Yes, Linda stammered desperately. She rummaged through her pockets and pulled out exactly 50 cents. She had originally planned to buy some meat with it, but now she handed it over with a heart so pained she nearly cried. All of it, in her mind, was her sister-in-law Helen's fault. Who on earth would end up with a daughter-in-law as terrifying as this? They must have been cursed. I accepted the money from Linda Thompson. She turned to look at the others, and they immediately understood her signal. Every single one of them dug through their pockets and sleeves, pulling out whatever loose change they had, and obediently handing it to me. All right, I said. You've met me, and you've brought your gifts. Anyone planning to stay for dinner? No. We'll leave right now. A whole gaggle of aunts, uncles, and cousins practically held on to each other as they fled the Thompson courtyard like their lives depended on it. Only Helen's song remained, her pants still soaked. What's the matter, Mom? I asked lightly. Your family all understood the rules, but you didn't bring a single gift for your daughter-in-law. I stood above her, frowning, then stepped back a little, as if worried she might dirty me. Helen stiffened. Oh, of course I did. In my room, inside the wooden chest by the headboard. I'll get it for you. No need. I'll get it myself. I headed toward her bedroom. Helen panicked and stumbled after me, but just as she reached the doorway, she heard a loud crack. I'd snapped the lock on the chest clean off. I lifted the lid and quickly swept all the cash and ration coupons inside into my hands. A quick glance told me it was more than 1,000 yuan. In the 1970s, that was an enormous fortune. Well, I said, folding the money neatly, looks like Mom is the most generous person in this whole family. I walked out of the room. Mom, go change your clothes. Don't be old and still unable to control your bladder. I'm not free enough to take care of you. With my back straight, I returned to my bedroom. A moment later, the courtyard filled with Helen's muffled sobbing. Ethan stood quietly in a corner, pressed against the wall like a child being punished. See? I said casually. A man who doesn't blindly obey his mother or meddle in household matters isn't so unbearable. His hands just need to be firm, and his voice needs to be loud. That's all. That evening I cooked again, and Ethan helped, washing vegetables and slicing meat. Helen watched her son being ordered around like a servant in the kitchen. She was so distressed she nearly burst into tears, but she didn't dare say a word. You're already awake, I said as I glanced toward her. Don't just stand there. The courtyard is filthy. Go sweep it. Fine, I'll sweep. Helen had intended to sneak out and complain to the neighbors about her vicious daughter-in-law. But before she could even reach the gate, I assigned her chores. She swallowed her anger and didn't dare talk back. She told herself she would complain to her husband once he came home. When Alan Thompson returned from work and stepped into the yard, he saw his usually arrogant, prideful wife bent over, sweeping, while his lazy son was diligently cleaning dishes. He glanced at me, and his gaze grew noticeably softer. Just when dinner was finished, a pair of twins rushed into the courtyard. Auntie? Uncle, we're back. I looked at the two children, and memories resurfaced immediately. These two were trouble. They were the children of Helen's younger brother. Helen adored her younger brother, and since her husband was a rich factory director, her standing in her maternal family was extremely high. Wanting the children to get a good education, she brought them from the countryside to raise. Of course, in the previous life, all the tutoring, washing, and cleaning related to these kids fell on Grace Miller. Helen even sugarcoated it, saying it was to help her get used to having children someday. Skilled in exploitation and excuses. These two kids quickly realized no one in the house liked Grace, so they turned on her, first ordering her around behind everyone's backs, then openly complaining and bossing her in front of the adults. I curved my lips. Teaching kids was something I excelled at. Eddie, Ella, Alan said warmly, this is your sister-in-law. Go greet her. Helen's eyes bulged. Good Lord, why did it seem like her husband was becoming more and more pleased with this new daughter-in-law of his? Hello, sister-in-law, Eddie and Ella said sweetly. They immediately put on their most obedient smiles. They knew they were outsiders here. Alan Thompson wouldn't dare upset Ethan, and the only real support they had was Grandma. And me, arriving after all of them, was the easiest one to test. I gave them a gentle smile. Hello, you two. Go wash your hands, then we'll eat. Yes, sister-in-law. The twins ran off to wash their hands and sat down at the table politely. Right after dinner started, someone from the textile mill arrived to find Alan because of an urgent issue. He excused himself and left. The moment he was gone, Eddie and Ella exhaled in relief. Both suddenly glanced toward Helen's song, who happened to be glaring daggers at me. Mom, is there something wrong with your eyes? I can help fix that, I said calmly as I put my chopsticks down. Helen flinched. No need. Ethan had also finished eating. Since I hadn't stood up yet, he didn't dare move either. Helen looked from me to the twins. Finally she said, Lisa, you're the sister-in-law. You should take responsibility for looking after the children. All right. From now on, the two kids will be under my supervision, I replied without hesitation. Then I added, Eddie, Ella, clear the table. And starting tomorrow, the three of you, 2 kids and you, Mom, will take turns washing the dishes, 1 week each. What? Why are you making the kids wash dishes? Why don't you do it? Helen burst out angrily. I'm the mother-in-law, the elder. Why should I wash dishes? If people hear about this, where will my dignity go? I cooked, I said lightly. Helen's eyelid twitched. She wanted to say she would cook instead, but after remembering the last 2 meals, how her cooking couldn't compare at all, she swallowed the words. This week, Ethan washes dishes. Next week, Eddie. After that, Ella. You'll be last, Mom, I said as I stood up. Also, did you see the pile of dirty laundry outside the twins' room? You two are old enough. Finish your homework, then wash it within an hour. With that, I turned and headed toward the back room. The whole family stared at me with round eyes. Ethan cleared his throat. Eddie and Ella thought he was about to scold me. But instead he said, I advise you two to listen to my wife. Otherwise, deal with the consequences yourselves. Then he puffed out his chest and marched proudly into the kitchen to wash dishes and clean up. I had barely stepped into my room when splashing noises erupted from the yard, followed by giggling from the twins. Ethan, washing dishes in the kitchen, glanced out and immediately understood. He had clearly heard his mother egging the kids on earlier. How could they still not learn? Didn't they know his wife was not someone to provoke? I kicked the bedroom door open and strode into the courtyard. Eddie and Ella were splashing water everywhere, tossing basins full of water at each other like maniacs. They froze when they saw me, but when they noticed I wasn't scolding them and was even smiling faintly, they became smug again. Their movements grew even bolder. Water soaked the entire yard. The blankets, sheets, and clothes Ethan had just washed were covered in muddy splatters. Having fun? I asked. So fun, sister-in-law. Do you want to play too? Eddie grinned mischievously. Behind the main door, Helen peeked out, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. She thought she had found a way to get back at me. After all, kids playing in water was normal. What could I do? I couldn't exactly beat someone else's children. All right, I said warmly. Let me play with you too. Eddie and Ella blinked in confusion, not yet understanding what kind of play I meant. Then I grabbed a basin, yanked open the lid of the large water tank, filled it to the brim, and splashed it straight onto them. Before they could even catch their breath, I scooped water again. 4, 5 basins in rapid succession, dumping every single one over their heads. In the previous life, these two absolutely loved this game. Every time Grace washed clothes, they would accidentally splash water all over the freshly cleaned laundry. At first, they pretended to apologize. After that, their true colors came out. They even admitted outright that they did it on purpose. What can you do about it? Some people deserve to be taught, but some are rotten at the core. I had no interest in reforming brats like these. If they behaved, I wouldn't touch them. If not, well, the twins screeched as I drenched them again. Helen Song panicked and rushed out of her room, her legs wobbling as she stumbled toward the 2 kids. Eddie, Ella, my poor babies, what happened? Splash. Another basin of water drenched her completely. Mom, I said pleasantly, if you want to bathe, please go into the bathroom. Bathing in the courtyard isn't great. What if the neighbors see? You're the director's wife, don't embarrass Dad. Helen froze, shivering both from cold water and fury. She quickly dragged the 2 children into the bathroom to wash up and change clothes. Even though it was summer, cold water baths still made people catch colds easily. Ethan had finished cleaning the kitchen and stood obediently beside me. Honey, I'm done, he said. Good, bring me a lounge chair, I replied. Yes, honey, right away. Ethan struggled to carry the chair into the courtyard, nearly dropping it several times. I shot him a glare. He immediately straightened up and held his breath, afraid to exhale too loudly. Tomorrow at 5 in the morning, I said, I'll take you to train your stamina. Your father wants you to test into the factory, but with your condition, even if they lowered the standards, you still wouldn't pass. Ethan lowered his head in shame. His middle school diploma barely existed. It had only been granted out of respect for his father. But when exam time came for the factory, Alan Thompson personally monitored the test and didn't allow a single exception. Ethan even failed applying for the security department. Poor guy, truly. Half an hour later, Helen came out with the kids, all 3 freshly changed and clean. The moment they stepped into the courtyard and saw me lounging comfortably on the chair while Ethan diligently poured me tea, Helen felt like someone had kicked her heart repeatedly. It hurt, but she couldn't do a thing. Eddie and Ella looked at me with wide, frightened eyes. The 3 of them were just about to retreat to their rooms when I said, cold as ice, "Stop." All 3 froze. You. What are you going to do to the kids? Helen stammered. You already hit them. When did I hit them? I asked calmly. They invited me, right? I turned to Ella. On the outside, she looked gentle and timid, but every bit of mischief came from her. Eddie was nothing more than the knife in her hand, a reckless, foolish boy she controlled easily. Yes, we invited sister-in-law to play, Ella whispered, finally understanding fear. Good. Since the game is over, the 2 of you should start your homework. Helen quickly tried to intervene, afraid I'd do something else to the kids. They made a mess of Ethan's laundry. Water splashed everywhere. Who's going to clean it up? I looked at her. I'm the sister-in-law. If the kids don't understand things, I'll teach them. Mom, would you like to go back to your room to sleep? For some reason, Helen suddenly remembered the water basin that nearly smashed into her earlier. I'm gonna sleep now, she muttered and hurried away. Eddie and Ella stood frozen, swallowing hard. This sister-in-law was no joke. All right, stop standing there like statues, I said. Tonight's tasks are heavy. First, scrub the courtyard tiles clean, no mud left at all. Second, wash all of Ethan's laundry again. You can't return to your room until you finish. The twins went pale. Why should we listen to you? Eddie blurted out. Crack! I kicked the wash basin beside me. It shattered instantly into pieces, one shard skidding all the way to the kids' feet. What did you say? I asked, staring straight at him. Ella yanked her brother's sleeve. We'll do it right now, sister-in-law. I smiled. Clever girl. She knew which way the wind was blowing. Ethan stood beside me, fanning me like an oversized, obedient dog. The 2 children worked quickly. Born in the countryside, they were used to manual labor, so they handled it efficiently. They swept all the water from the yard and wiped away the mud with cloths. They washed every single piece of dirty laundry again. It took them 2 full hours just to finish. I lay on the lounge chair and took a short nap. "Sister-in-law, we're done. Can we go back to our room now?" Ella whispered cautiously. "You can, but only after you finish your homework," I said. "Yes, sister-in-law." The two scurried back to their room like frightened kittens. I went to the bathroom to wash up. When I returned, I saw Ethan Thompson standing beside the bed, his eyes burning as he stared at the freshly changed sheets. The moment he saw me step inside, he turned away shyly. "Honey, tonight is our wedding night, and I want..." He walked toward me slowly, his gaze and breath both hot. "I want to be with you." I slapped him hard. "Dream on. I don't want that." But honey, we're married." Ethan's voice wavered pitifully, like a bullied bride. "You wanted to get married, so we married. That doesn't mean we have to sleep together. If you want to share a bed, make me satisfied first." "But I've already been so good," he muttered. "It's been 1 day. Not even close. You'll only get what you want when I think you deserve it. And only I can bring it up. You don't get to ask. Why do you think? Because you're stronger than me? Because you're a man?" "No," Ethan stammered. I know. Good. That night, Ethan slept on the floor. I knew that couldn't last forever. It was summer now, so the floor was tolerable. But once autumn and winter came, he wouldn't be able to stand it. And even if I didn't like him, I wasn't cruel enough to let him get sick. Which meant the room needed to be remodeled. Thinking about that, I drifted off without realizing. Ethan tossed and turned on the floor. The ground really was hard. He was a married man now, yet he wasn't allowed to sleep in the bed. Worst of all, his wife was terrifying. But she was also really beautiful. Ethan sighed. Who knew how long it would be before he got to sleep in the same bed and hold his wife? At 5 sharp the next morning, I shot up. Ethan was still sleeping like a log. I grabbed him by the collar and yanked him up. He jumped awake, eyes wide. "Honey, wash your face and brush your teeth. I'm taking you running." Running? Running? Ethan jolted fully awake. He didn't want to run, but he didn't dare disobey. He dragged himself to wash up with the expression of someone heading to execution. Helen Song hadn't slept all night. When she heard noise in the yard, she got up too. She opened her door and froze. Her son, who used to oversleep every single day, was washing his face and brushing his teeth. Before this, she had to shout herself hoarse just to get him to do that once. "Good morning, mother-in-law," I said. "Please help me watch the kitchen. The small pot is cooking porridge, the big pot is steaming buns, and wash the vegetables in the basin for me." I assigned the tasks clearly and firmly. After yesterday, Helen knew she was no match for me. She didn't dare object and only nodded obediently. "Ethan, let's go." "Yes, honey," Ethan hurried after me. "Ethan, where are you going?" Helen grabbed his arm nervously. "I'm going jogging with my wife." He said it and immediately hurried after me, terrified of falling behind and getting punished. Near the Thompson house was a small river that flowed year-round. Local kids usually came there to catch fish. Early in the morning, the cool breeze and sparkling water looked refreshing. "Warm up first," I ordered, "then run 50 laps." Ethan's eyes nearly fell out of his head. He looked like he believed he was about to die under my hands. An hour later, the two of us returned. Ethan's legs were so soft he could barely stand. Right then, we ran into Alan Thompson at the gate. "Lisa, where did the two of you go?" he asked. "Sir, I took Ethan jogging. The factory is recruiting workers next month. We both want to apply," I answered with a smile. "Lisa, you graduated middle school too, right?" Alan asked. "Yes, sir." "Good. Then both of you meet the requirements. As long as you pass the exam, the factory welcomes you," Alan Thompson said. "Thank you, sir," I replied. He and I walked into the house together, without sparing even a glance at his son, who looked as tired as a beaten dog. Ethan suddenly felt like he was the one who had married into my family, instead of the other way around. After breakfast, Eddie and Ella trudged off to school. Alan changed clothes and went back to work. That left only Grandma Thompson, Helen Song, Ethan and me at home. "Mom, you and Ethan will clean the house in the courtyard," I said. "As for your room, please clean it yourself." After giving my instructions, I was about to pull Ethan back to our room when, bang, the courtyard gate was shoved open. I lifted a brow. "Oh, after everything that happened yesterday, the Thompsons and the Songs still have the nerve to show up?" Linda Thompson marched in, dragging her two sons behind her and carrying an elderly woman. My eyes narrowed. That old woman was Ethan's grandmother. For years, Linda had been the one taking care of her, of course, for pay. Alan gave Linda 5 yuan a month, plus separate money for medicine and doctor visits. Earlier, Grandma could still walk and help watch the kids or do a bit of housework, but last month, she fell, and after recovering, she still couldn't stand. Every daily task required someone to tend to her personally. Linda, lazy and greedy as she was, couldn't tolerate that kind of work for long. She originally thought to demand more money from her brother. If he gave more, she could endure it. If not, she'd dump the burden. But after being humiliated by me yesterday, she'd gone home furious and complained to her mother. The old woman had immediately decided to personally take action. A newly married granddaughter-in-law? Just one word, filial piety, was enough to crush her. They believed that with a paralyzed grandmother, I wouldn't dare do anything. If I refused, society would spit on me. And Alan might even kick me out. Linda assumed that once her brother stepped in, I would surely be forced back to my mother's home. So she came early, her schemes already planned. "Sister-in-law," Linda announced loudly, purposely projecting her voice so the neighbors could hear. "Mother's lived with us for so many years. Now that Ethan's married, she insists on coming back to enjoy her blessings with her granddaughter-in-law." I smiled slightly. The old woman was venomous to the bone. In my previous life, the moment she saw Grace Miller, she forced her to kneel to serve her. If Grace hesitated even a second, Grandma would scream that she was being abused. She even deliberately peed herself, so Grace would have to clean it. If the food was warm, she said she would freeze to death. If it was hot, she said she'd get burned. Eat fast, she'd choke. Eat slow, she'd starve. Everything was death, 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 yet somehow she never actually died. Helen Song and Linda exchanged a glance. Instantly catching each other's meaning, both stepped forward excitedly. "That's right, Mother, you should stay here for a while," Helen chimed in. "Eddie, Ella, bring great-grandma into the room. Lisa," she added meaningfully, "your husband's grandmother is here now, so you must—" "Of course I'll take care of her," I said calmly. Helen immediately believed she'd found my weakness. Her eyes shone with triumph as she looked at Linda, who almost burst into delighted laughter. "Oh, my blanket!" Grandma suddenly croaked out. "Why hasn't anyone dried it out? You, granddaughter-in-law." Before she could finish scolding me, I opened every door and window and raised my voice. "Mother, as your daughter-in-law, I didn't even know Grandma was still alive. You didn't tell me. Why didn't you take her blanket out to dry in the sun? Do you not want to take care of Grandma?" Helen froze. "What? How did this become my responsibility?" Linda quickly cut in. "Megan, Lisa, you're the granddaughter-in-law. It's only right for you to take care of Grandma. What, you don't want to?" "I never said I didn't," I replied. "But my mother-in-law is Grandma's actual daughter-in-law. Am I supposed to overstep her and steal her chance to fulfill her filial duty?" Helen's face stiffened. "I know you've worked hard for many years," I continued smoothly, looking at Linda, "and my mother-in-law, well, she hasn't fulfilled her responsibility so far. This time, I support you." You're talking nonsense," Linda snapped. She didn't dare offend her sister-in-law. After all, Helen was the one holding all of Alan's money. "Auntie," I said with a pleasant smile, "my mother-in-law is a very filial daughter. She just hasn't had the chance to personally care for Grandma all these years. Now that Grandma wants to come home, I'll leave this family matter to you." I reached out my hand. "And this month's caretaking money?" "My mother-in-law will be paying it. As for today, your first day returning Grandma to us, please give us back the payment." Linda Thompson froze. "What nonsense are you saying?" "Auntie, if you take care of Grandma, of course you're paid. But if you don't take care of her, how can you keep the money?" I looked her straight in the eye, my tone cold. A greedy person never feels they have enough. Her two grown sons had already backed all the way to the doorway. They had also witnessed my strength yesterday. They'd originally disagreed with their mother's plan, but after being yelled at, they had no choice but to carry the old woman here. And now they realized they were about to lose their household helper and the monthly 5 yuan. Not to mention the milk, eggs, and meat they had siphoned from the Thompsons for years, all of which were now in danger of disappearing. Linda grew angrier the more she thought about it, cursing her own mother for being foolish enough to drag them into this mess. Under the pressure I put on her, Linda finally snapped. How could I keep $5? Ethan, take me and your cousins home and bring the money back. I looked at Ethan. Yes, honey, he answered immediately. He was just happy for an excuse to leave the house. Bring it back within 1 hour, I added. You have exactly that long. Ethan looked miserable, but nodded. Yes, honey, auntie, cousins, let's go. He pulled Linda away, leaving only Grandma, Helen Song, and me in the room. You wicked girl, Grandma barked. Ruining the household, disrespecting your elders the day you arrive. You want to rebel? She hadn't expected me to be this strong. Granddaughter-in-law, she barked again. Kneel, bring me a basin. I burst out laughing. Helen shuddered at the sound. Then I kicked Grandma sharply in the calf. She collapsed to her knees with a thud. Grandma, I am your granddaughter-in-law, I said sweetly. Ow, Helen yelped, not expecting her leg to get struck when she leaned too close. I nudged the wash basin with my foot. It slid across the floor and splashed a bit of water onto Grandma's hands. She instinctively caught it. Oh, Grandma, your hands work just fine. If you can still hold things, don't bully your granddaughter-in-law. If word spreads, people will only say an old woman abused her daughter-in-law out of meanness. That kind of cruelty? It shaves years off your lifespan. With that, I turned and walked out. Let them scream if they wanted. I didn't care. Seeing that I refused to care for her, and even walked away, Grandma trembled with fury. That shameless wench. Mother, please, Helen hissed. We cannot afford to offend this daughter-in-law. If you want to live long, go to Linda's house. Let her take you. Helen had finally learned her lesson. She'd already lost too many battles against me. First, my strength surpassed everyone in the house. Second, Alan Thompson openly took my side. These two things alone made me a terrifying trump card in both the Thompson and Song families. Humph, Grandma sniffed. We'll see. There's no way she dares neglect me. Just wait. Go buy some groceries, she ordered sharply. Helen let out a helpless sigh. Fine. If you want to smash your own head against the wall, go ahead. A daughter-in-law like me can't stop you. She left to shop, leaving only Grandma and me in the courtyard. I knew she was about to try something again. Lisa? Lisa, she suddenly yelled. Come here, I need to use the toilet, hurry. I strode into the room. The moment she saw me, Grandma smiled until her eyes nearly disappeared. Then, suddenly, she deliberately released everything into her pants. The stench was awful. Oh dear, Lisa, she said, still smiling, you're too slow. I couldn't hold it. Come wash me quickly. I smiled back just as sweetly. Then I held my breath, shut every window, and very conveniently closed the door behind me. Grandma, I'm just a weak little daughter-in-law. I can't lift you, I said gently. But don't worry, Ethan will be home soon. Or my mother-in-law. Your blood grandson and your real daughter-in-law will surely not mind helping. You dare leave me like this? Grandma shrieked. I'm your grandmother-in-law. Grandma, I said calmly, why would you say something like that? I really can't lift you, Grandma, I said gently. But you're right. I can't let you sit around smelling like that either. So I'll go look for someone who can help. I pretended to walk out. Mrs. Marks next door is a very kind neighbor. I'm sure she'd be thrilled to help clean up an old lady covered in, well, this. The old woman's face instantly contorted. Mrs. Marks and Grandma Thompson had hated each other for decades. They fought every chance they got. Stop right there, Grandma screeched. If Mrs. Marks found out about this, she'd probably laugh herself into the grave. Then, astonishingly, Grandma began climbing down from the bed on her own. Oh my, wetting your pants cures paralysis? I said with a bright smile. A medical miracle, Grandma. One accident and your legs suddenly work again. Grandma shot me a murderous glare, then staggered into the bathroom by herself. I stepped back to keep as much distance as possible while she muttered curses under her breath, washed herself and changed clothes. A few minutes later, she returned, carrying a foul-smelling basin of dirty laundry. Lisa Miller, wash these for me, she demanded. No, I said cheerfully. Absolutely not. I still need to invite Mrs. Marks over to witness this medical miracle. This is big news, Grandma. I should probably tell Aunt Linda and the whole family too. Ah, Lisa Miller, shut your mouth this instant. Grandma trembled with fury, then quietly turned around and washed the laundry herself. That's better. Whatever mess she made, she could clean it. When Helen Song came home and glanced into the courtyard, her eyes lit up. Grandma's laundry was hanging outside. Her face brightened, thinking her mother-in-law had finally tamed me. But then she spotted Grandma crouching and scrubbing clothes smeared with feces. Helen froze. "Mom, this is a medical miracle," Grandma announced quickly, before I could speak. "I came home feeling so good that my limbs loosened right up." "Oh, so emotional joy is the miracle cure?" I asked pleasantly. Yes, exactly," Grandma nodded furiously. "You should go back to Linda's house," she added. "You're used to staying there. Once the laundry dries, I'll leave." "No need to wait," I said. "Go now. Here, take a basket and dry the clothes at Linda's place." Just then, Ethan returned home. Seeing Grandma wanting to leave, he had no choice but to escort her away again. Only after Grandma was gone did Helen fully grasp what happened. Her mother-in-law had been defeated by me too. She looked at me with pure fear, finally understanding she had no way to win. I was very satisfied with her expression. "Mother-in-law," I said calmly, "please clean your own room." Then I returned to my room to read. Helen stepped into Grandma's room and was hit by a wave of toxic stench. Right. I hadn't opened the windows, and Grandma hadn't washed the bedding yet. When Ethan came home, I was drawing a redesign for our bedroom. Decorating was a skill I'd learned before dying in my last life, mostly from my old mother-in-law, during the hopeless years living with Nathan Cole. "Honey, what are you doing?" Ethan asked. "I'm planning to renovate our room," I replied. "You can't sleep on the bed right now. I can't let anyone else know this, but I also can't have you sleeping on the floor forever." I handed him the design. "If we install a low platform here, you can sleep there at night." Ethan gazed at me with deep emotion, thinking privately that his wife truly cared for him. But he was also painfully aware he'd been a useless man, flirting around, partying, never accomplishing anything. The textile factory was huge, yet he'd even failed the security department exam. Everything was his own fault. No wonder I wouldn't let him on the bed. I glanced at him. "Come on, we're going to the scrapyard to see if we can find usable boards." Yes, honey. Ethan straightened immediately and followed me like an obedient puppy. In my previous life, this man had been completely worthless. Ethan had always been impulsive and foolish, easily manipulated by others, but he wasn't completely heartless. According to what Grace Miller told me from my previous life, after she died, Ethan cried like a child. Even though he never cared about her and never helped her, at least he never hit her. I looked at him and finally spoke. "Ethan Thompson, only weak and pathetic trash, raises a fist against his wife and children." Ethan stiffened. He suddenly remembered the day I first returned, when he almost raised his hand at me. "Honey, yesterday, only acted like that because you hit my mom first," he stammered. I lost my temper. "Normally, no matter what, I've never hit a woman." I nodded. "I can forgive you for what happened yesterday. You were acting on instinct to protect your mother. That wasn't entirely your fault." Ethan brightened for a split second. "But," I continued, "you must distinguish right from wrong. Yesterday, your mom was the one who attacked me first. You know exactly what she was trying to do. As the man of this household, you need to be clear about that. We're a family now. If your mother tries to interfere with our life together and you won't step up, then I'll handle things my own way." Ethan fell silent, deep in thought. Good. Maybe his brain was finally sprouting a neuron or two. At the scrapyard, I handed the gatekeeper a cigarette, the good kind Ethan kept for himself. Ethan almost cried. "Sir," I said sweetly, "we just got married and we don't have much furniture at home. We wanted to see if there's anything here we can fix up and use." The gatekeeper chuckled. "A thrifty young wife. Nice, go ahead. Tell me what you like, and I'll help you call a cart." "Thank you so much, sir," I beamed. Then I slipped him half a pack of Ethan's cigarettes. "Those were mine," Ethan whimpered. The man laughed. "Don't worry about it. Happy to help." I tugged Ethan inside. Very quickly, we found a beautifully carved wooden bed thrown into a corner, its 2 legs broken. There were also 2 study desks, several chairs, and a wardrobe. These were exactly the kinds of things I'd chosen in my previous life. Honey, if we bring all this home, there won't be enough space." Ethan whispered. "Just bring it all," I said. "Whatever we can use, we'll use. Whatever we can't, we'll chop for firewood." Ethan nodded instantly. My wife really knows how to manage a household. With the gatekeeper's help, everything I picked out was quickly delivered to the Thompson home. Alan Thompson was the director of the textile factory, so his house had a huge courtyard. Helen Song had planted a small garden there. She'd wanted flowers at first, but Alan rejected the idea, so she begrudgingly planted vegetables instead. The remaining space was empty. When Helen saw me and Ethan dragging in a pile of old beat-up furniture, she froze, eyes wide, muttering under her breath. But she didn't dare say a word. She just turned around and disappeared into the house. I pulled Ethan to start disassembling everything. While taking things apart, I found several wooden boxes hidden inside the bed frame, inside the desks, and even inside the wardrobe. Ethan's eyes lit up. He leaned in and whispered, "Honey, could these be valuables from some rich family?" I flicked his forehead. "Take them all to our room, hide them under the bed, and don't say a word to anyone." "Yes, honey," Ethan replied instantly, obedient as ever. We continued dismantling things, saving usable wood and smashing the rest for firewood. Looking at the beautifully carved bed frame, piece by piece, the carved bed was taken apart. It hurt my heart to destroy something so beautiful, but there was no other choice. In times like these, if anyone caught even a hint of suspicion, our entire family could be sent to reform. The outcome would be miserable. While Ethan and I were hammering and sorting through everything, quite a few neighbors wandered over to watch the commotion. Seeing the two of us working side by side, they couldn't help but marvel at how affectionate newlyweds were. "No one's ever seen that boy Ethan lift a finger before," one woman whispered. "Yet now that he's married, he looks like a totally different person." Helen Song overheard the murmurs from inside the house and stomped her feet in anger. But even she had to admit, Ethan was indeed listening to me completely. The two of us didn't finish cleaning until noon. Since there wasn't time to cook anything fancy, I kneaded some dough and made a pot of noodles. Alan Thompson didn't come home for lunch. He'd returned yesterday, only because his new daughter-in-law had arrived, and he needed to show proper attention. Normally he was so busy he rarely had time to eat at home. Ethan slurped down 2 huge bowls before he finally looked full. Normally he didn't eat that much, but he'd run that morning and worked all day with me. Of course he was starving. Seeing her son eat like a laborer, Helen's eyes turned red with distress. Looking at how exhausted he was, she secretly shot me a glare. She opened her mouth, ready to scold me, but when she saw my cold expression, she shrank back immediately and lowered her eyes. That afternoon, Ethan and I kept working on the room. He followed my instructions, hammering and knocking around for hours. More neighbors gathered to watch. This neighborhood was full of women and older ladies who didn't work. Aside from cooking, they had nothing to do. So naturally, they came to gossip. "This room looks so much brighter now," one auntie praised cheerfully. I smiled warmly, calling to Ethan, "Bring everyone some tea." "We just want to make the place more livable," I said lightly. "Later, when we have kids, we'll have enough space. Since we have free time now, we're fixing it early." Everyone nodded in approval, complimenting me as a polite and hardworking young wife. Helen, on the other hand, was fuming silently. Good-tempered? If only they knew how the house had turned upside down yesterday. Lisa, a sharp-tongued aunt, chimes in, clearly itching to stir trouble. "Yesterday, the new bride came home and your house sure sounded lively." She was clearly waiting to see us embarrassed. I glanced at her, softened my expression just slightly, and replied calmly, "Yesterday, a lot of relatives stopped by. Since I just married into the family, both sides naturally came to visit. And, well, there are a few naughty kids around. If they disturbed anyone, I apologize." "Just relatives, she said. "But I heard something else happened?" "Maybe you misheard, Auntie," I replied smoothly. "My father-in-law is very strict. No one in this house would dare cause trouble." "Or, are you saying my father-in-law doesn't manage his household properly? That his family lacks discipline?" The aunt blanched immediately, as if she dared to insult Alan Thompson, director of the textile factory, respected by everyone. If her husband heard she bad-mouthed him, she'd get slapped for sure. "Maybe I did mishear." I gave her a pleasant smile. "You're older, Auntie. Your ears might not be as sharp as they used to be. You should go home and rest more." I kept smiling, but everyone there understood clearly. This new daughter-in-law was not someone to mess with. Thinking carefully, barely after entering the family, I had already tamed both Helen Song and Ethan Thompson. How could someone like me possibly be gentle? Very quickly, everyone understood the situation, and no one dared touch me anymore. As it neared dinner time, the neighbors all headed home. The room Ethan and I shared was now fully repaired. I had built a wooden platform by the window, with storage space inside, and laid a thin mattress on top, along with a small table. During the day, we could study there together. At night, Ethan only needed to take out his blanket and pillow to sleep on the platform. Once the curtains were closed, no one could see what we were doing. I cooked dinner as usual. I never intended to become some lazy wife who didn't lift a finger. Anything that fell within my responsibilities, I would do properly. Anything that wasn't, I wouldn't touch at all. After dinner was ready, Alan Thompson unusually came home on time today, and Eddie and Ella arrived with him. The two kids now understood who actually held authority in this house, so they quietly finished dinner, cleared the table, went to their room to do homework, and even came back out to wash their own clothes. This week, it was Ethan's turn to wash the dishes. Seeing his son handle the dishes so smoothly, Alan nodded with obvious satisfaction. He turned to me. "Lisa, you took Ethan running this morning, right?" I nodded politely. "Yes, Dad. Ethan and I both want to work hard. We still don't have jobs. It wouldn't be right for you to support us forever. We're young and healthy. If we keep trying and improving ourselves, we'll definitely find work and put our abilities to use." The more Alan listened, the more pleased he became. He nodded nonstop. "Go to bed early," he said gently. I agreed, then went back to check the kitchen. Ethan had finished cleaning up. The two of us returned to our room. As soon as we stepped inside, I tossed him a book. Ethan scratched his head. "Wife, every time I look at a book, I get sleepy." "Good," I said calmly. "Let me help you wake up." He jolted upright, instantly alert. "I'm awake, wide awake, not sleepy at all." He opened the book and forced himself to read. After wasting so many years playing around, there were plenty of things he didn't understand. "If you don't know something, ask me," I said. Ethan immediately began asking non-stop questions. The two of us studied together until 10 at night. At one point, Alan stepped outside and saw his son genuinely studying. He grew even more satisfied with his new daughter-in-law, then quietly returned to his room. Helen Song took that chance to complain, rambling endlessly about how much their house had been turned upside down in just 2 days since I became a daughter-in-law. Alan stared at her coldly. "So all those changes are bad?" he asked. Helen flinched. "No, they're good." On the third morning after the wedding, the day I was supposed to visit my parents back home, Alan personally spoke to me at dawn. "Lisa, today you'll go visit your parents. I've prepared everything needed." Then he turned to Helen. "Helen, give Lisa some money." Helen's face twisted painfully. All the money in the house was now in my hands. Alan looked at me, surprised. I gave a small cough. "Dad, was she the one who offered it to me?" Helen blurted. "I did." "Good," Alan said. "From now on, let Lisa manage all the household finances." Helen nearly collapsed. How is a daughter-in-law supposed to control the money while the parents-in-law are still alive? She felt as bitter as swallowing poison. "Don't worry, Dad," I said calmly. "I'll keep everything in order." Of course, I wasn't about to refuse money handed directly to me. Alan nodded in satisfaction and left for work. Ethan and I went out to buy the necessary gifts for my visit home. He pedaled the bicycle while I sat behind him. The Strong household wasn't far from the Thompson household. We all lived in the same residential compound. My parents both worked at the steel factory. When we arrived, When Grace Miller and Nathan Cole saw Ethan and me walk in, Grace instinctively stiffened before mustering the courage to come over and grab my hand. "Lisa," she whispered. I nodded. Seeing the calm expression on my face, the tension that had been hanging in Grace's chest finally loosened. "You two have been back long?" I asked. "We just got here," Grace replied carefully. Ethan handed the gifts to my mom. "Mom, Lisa and I came home to visit everyone." When he was being serious, Ethan actually looked somewhat like a man. "Not bad at all." My mom nodded repeatedly, clearly pleased. Nathan greeted Ethan, and the two men sat together, talking. One was lively, the other steady. The contrast couldn't have been more obvious. Even watching them made Grace embarrassed. She pulled me into a room to talk privately. Lisa, is everything okay at the Thompson house? I smiled and told her everything I had accomplished over the past 2 days. After listening, she froze. The bedridden old lady, she was faking it? I nodded. And your father-in-law handed over all the family finances to you? You're in charge of managing the money? And future wages too? I nodded again. And Helen Song hasn't caused trouble? I nodded once more. And Ethan, he gets up early to run? Does housework with you? Even washes dishes? Grace's eyes widened to the point they almost popped out. She simply couldn't believe it. I smiled. I told you, the Thompson house isn't a den of wolves for me. I'm the wolf to them. Grace threw her arms around me, tears pouring nonstop. Lisa, all of this, it's because of you. If not for you, my life would have repeated exactly like the last time. I cut her off gently. What about you and Nathan? At the mention of Nathan, her face flushed red. He's really good to me. How good? I teased. She covered her face, needing a moment before she finally told me everything. Ever since she married into the Cole family a few days ago, Nathan had immediately given her his savings passbook and honestly told her everything about his family. Nathan only had his mother, and Mrs. Cole was a cultured, gentle, elegant woman who handled housework well and was easygoing. Their relationship as mother and daughter-in-law was harmonious. Grace happily took over all the housework, cooking warm meals every day so that when Nathan came home from work, dinner was already prepared. She was gentle and loved reading, and conveniently so did Nathan. They had many similarities, and for the past few days the two of them were inseparable and affectionate. After telling me all that, she hesitated, then shyly asked, Lisa, what about you and Ethan? Did you too? Yet? I shook my head. Her smile tightened, bitterness flickering across her expression. She felt like her happiness had been stolen from me. I held her hand reassuringly. Grace, Nathan and I were never meant to be. If I had married him, none of us would be happy. Things are better this way. You're happy, and I'm living comfortably. We talked for a while before it was time for lunch. The two of us headed to the kitchen to help my mom cook. Seeing both her daughters living well filled her with deep satisfaction. She had once thought I could only be happy if I married Nathan. She never imagined Ethan would become obedient and well-behaved in my hands. Nothing like the good-for-nothing troublemaker he used to be. My mom opened her mouth several times as if wanting to say something but hesitated. So I simply told her everything about how Alan Thompson had given me full authority over the household finances. Her smile grew even brighter. It's wonderful that your husband's family values you like that. Yes, Mom. And Grace, how are you and Nathan? I asked. Grace beamed shyly. He even gave me his entire savings passbook. At that moment, my mom finally felt truly at ease. She loved both her daughters, and it wasn't that she didn't care about Grace. She just always felt she had owed me too much. Ethan Thompson and Nathan Cole were still drinking with my dad, and they had quite a bit. We hadn't even finished lunch before it was time for us to say goodbye and head home. Ethan was so drunk he could barely walk straight. Nathan, on the other hand, had always had a strong tolerance for alcohol. Ethan's a little drunk, Nathan said. Sounding apologetic, he tried to call me sister-in-law, but the word stuck in his throat. After all, I still looked so young. I didn't make it hard for him and simply smiled. Don't worry, I'll take care of him. You make sure you take good care of Grace. Nathan looked at Grace with eyes full of tenderness and affection, so warm and real that anyone could see his feelings for her at a glance. That kind of gaze. Even in the lifetime before this one, before my death, I had never seen it directed toward me. Back then, Nathan was kind to me only out of responsibility. But toward Grace, I could clearly see it. He liked her. Liking was enough. As long as they could be happy in this life, that was all that mattered. And as for my own happiness, well, I would carve it out myself. When we arrived back at the Thompson house, I helped Ethan onto the bed and laid him down. After locking the bedroom door, I pulled out the boxes from under the bed and checked them again. Inside were gold bars, high-grade jade, and several land ownership certificates, extremely valuable things. I quickly put everything back, but leaving them under the bed wasn't safe. Alan Thompson was a factory director, and many people kept an eye on him. If anyone discovered these things and reported them, the entire family would be implicated. Sitting on the wooden platform, I thought for a long while before deciding I needed to bury them. Not in the yard. Digging there would attract attention. Instead, I touched the wooden platform under me, removed several planks, lifted the layers of wood underneath, and quietly dug a deep hole beneath the floor. Ethan was sleeping like a dead pig, and Helen Song was napping too. I silently placed all the boxes inside, covered them with soil, restored the tiles, put the wood back, and cleaned everything up. The room looked exactly as it had before. In just a few years, the National College Entrance Exam would be reinstated. Then the era of economic reform would arrive, and everything would change. In the last lifetime, I drifted through this world like a ghost for over 15 years. I knew exactly where the future was headed. The things I buried today would become the capital for my future ventures. I would build my own business empire, become the powerful woman I once dreamed of being, and expand my work throughout the country. Over the next month, I lived in the Thompson household as if I had fallen into water perfectly suited for fish. Helen Song had completely given up any idea of causing trouble. Every day she just went to the market to chat with neighbors. Other than her own room and the tasks I assigned, she didn't have to do anything else at home. Before this, she had to cook, wash clothes, tutor the kids. But the moment I stepped through the door, her life became much easier. Little Eddie and little Ella could handle their own affairs. They didn't need anyone to take care of them. Once they figured out that I absolutely refused to spoil them, they slowly began behaving, studying a bit more seriously, even improving slightly. Of course, only slightly. They were still at the bottom of their class. Helen Song had only gone through elementary school and couldn't help them much. Ethan definitely couldn't tutor them either. The two kids were in 5th grade now and would be moving up to middle school next year. Since they lived and ate in the Thompson household, Alan, out of respect for his wife, never asked her younger brother to contribute money. Helen herself obviously couldn't bring herself to ask her own brother for anything, meaning the Thompson family was essentially raising both of her nephews. When school holidays came, the kids even brought home bags full of gifts to their relatives in the countryside. And if their grades didn't improve, Helen had no intention of letting them continue school anyway. I was never a good person to begin with. Since I was born with a bad temper, I had no intention of reforming myself or saving anyone. I knew with their current level of schooling, the two kids definitely wouldn't pass the middle school entrance exam. I could tutor them and change their future, but I wouldn't. Recently, the kids had begun to panic openly. They quietly ran to Helen Song, asking if she could teach them. If they couldn't get into middle school, they'd be sent back to the countryside to farm. For children who had lived in the city for years, that felt like the sky was falling. But Helen was powerless to help. Just when the two were sulking miserably, Ethan's childhood sweetheart suddenly appeared. Her name was Lily Harper, a delicate, fragile type of girl who looked like she might be blown away by a soft breeze. When she arrived, Ethan was washing dishes. The moment she saw him, she shrieked as though someone had stepped on her tail. "Ethan, why are you washing dishes? This is women's work. Put that down and let me do it." As she spoke, Lily rolled up her sleeves and rushed over, trying to grab the dishes from his hands. Ethan didn't hold back at all. He stuffed the entire pile of dirty dishes into her arms. "Thanks, Lily. After you're done, don't forget to scrub the pot, and please sweep the kitchen floor while you're at it." Then he happily ran into the room to find me. "Lisa, we have a helper now. I get off early today." "Study," I said, tossing him a book. Ethan immediately sat down obediently. He no longer resisted studying like he used to. The recruitment exam was coming soon, and aside from eating, sleeping, and basic chores, he spent all his remaining time on his lessons. 15 minutes later, Lily finished cleaning the entire kitchen and rushed out to find Ethan, only to see him excitedly asking me how to solve a math problem. "Ethan, what are you doing? Is your sister-in-law teaching you?" "I can teach you too. I'm really patient." "You can teach?" he asked. "Yes, I graduated high school with very good grades." "That's great." I turned toward the living room. "Eddie, Ella, come here. Let Lily tutor you." Lily's expression instantly turned tragic as Eddie and Ella dragged her into their room for lessons. I glanced at Ethan, who was engrossed in his homework. He muttered, "I don't need her to teach me. My wife is way smarter than Lily. The corner of my mouth curved up. Crude? Yes. Awkward? Also yes. But coming from him, that was acceptable enough. From that day on, Lily practically took root in the Thompson household, using the excuse that she was tutoring the kids. Despite her so-called dedication, Eddie and Ella's scores remained exactly the same. Not even a millimeter of improvement. Then came the day Ethan and I were to take the recruitment exam at the textile factory. Because Ethan was also taking it, Alan Thompson adjusted the exam schedule himself to avoid any suspicion of favoritism. He even brought his secretary and several factory leaders to wait outside the exam room. This time, Ethan was well prepared. The test was not easy, but he felt he could handle every question. He worked with a bright grin on his face, confidence shining in his eyes. Seeing his expression, Alan knew his son would certainly pass. When the exam finished, the factory graded the papers on the spot. Any disputes could be checked immediately. After all his hard work, Ethan earned 8th place. The factory was recruiting 9 people this round. I came in first, so naturally, I was also on the acceptance list. When Ethan saw his name printed on the red announcement sheet, he jumped up in excitement, grabbed me in a tight hug and shouted, "Lisa! Look, I passed." I patted his shoulder, signaling him to let go. He instantly hopped backward like a startled rabbit. He stammered, I'm really happy." Alan Thompson stepped up to his son, nodding in satisfaction. "Ethan, you did very well this time." "Thank you, Dad." Ethan bowed his head, trembling with excitement. Alan shifted his gaze toward me. "People always say a man should marry a gentle wife, but after Ethan got married, he truly changed for the better. You've worked hard, Lisa." I gave him a soft smile. "It's all because of your influence, Dad. You're diligent and always willing to learn. As your children, of course we should follow your example." Alan nodded even more vigorously, patting both my shoulder and Ethan's. "After you two officially start at the factory, work hard. Show everyone what you're capable of." "Yes, Dad, we'll remember," Ethan and I answered in unison. When we got home, Helen Song had already heard that her son passed the exam. She rushed out, beaming. "I knew it, my son is so smart." "Smart what?" Ethan barked loudly. "If my wife hadn't kept me in line, I wouldn't have passed anything. I'm useless without her." Helen's face froze. Everything she meant to say got stuck in her throat. News of Ethan passing the textile factory exam spread quickly through the neighborhood. Everyone knew it was thanks to my tutoring. Soon, neighbors came asking if I could tutor their kids too. I refused every time, using my busy schedule as an excuse. People worked and still didn't give me their entire salary, yet they expected me to tutor their children for free? No thanks. After the exam, both Ethan and I completed our formal hiring procedures. I was assigned to the factory's administrative office, handling paperwork. Ethan joined the security team. Alan knew his son well. Passing the exam was impressive, but that was only because I had drilled every detail into his head day by day. The security team remained the most suitable place for him. Once our work schedules stabilized, I met Grace Miller again. She was living very well with the Newman family. When she heard that I had tamed everyone in the Thompson family and even got Ethan into the textile factory, she was stunned. In her previous life, she had tried coaxing Ethan into taking the exam. Soft words, gentle persuasion, all kinds of encouragement. No matter what she said, he refused to walk the straight path. I smiled and told her, "You just need to beat some sense into him." Grace secretly gave me a thumbs up. "The Thompson family really does suit you better." "Cole Newman is being transferred to G Province soon," she added shyly. "I'll go with him. When we move there, I'll write to you. Let's keep in touch." "That place will grow rapidly in a few years," I reminded her. She nodded. Like me, she'd wandered for over a decade in this world during her last life. She knew exactly where the future was heading. We talked until late evening before going our separate ways. A few days later, Grace and Cole left town. Before leaving, they came to my house for one last meal with my parents. This time, Ethan didn't drink. He was working in the security office now. I wouldn't let him, and he listened to everything I said. His one and only motivation these days was to someday be allowed to sleep in the same bed as me. I knew exactly what he wanted and recognized how well he treated me. But at this point, I still had no romantic feelings for him. I believed that kind of intimacy should be mutual. Only when both hearts agree should it happen. When we returned home after the farewell dinner, I didn't expect Lily Harper to still be there. She had just finished tutoring the kids. As she walked out, she saw Ethan and me talking closely. Her eyes instantly reddened. Then, for no reason at all, she suddenly stiffened as if shocked by electricity. Her feet tangled, and her whole body lurched forward, falling straight toward Ethan. Ethan immediately pulled me aside. Thud. Lily crashed face first onto the ground, crying out in pain. Ethan rubbed his chest. "Thank God we dodged in time," Ethan muttered, patting his chest. "If she'd fallen on me, she's heavy. Both of us would have been hurt." The corner of my lips curled upward, a perfect clean dodge. Lily Harper's tears flowed even harder. "Ethan, I'm hurt. Can you take me to the hospital?" Ethan was about to say no when Helen Song walked out of her room. The moment she saw Lily sprawled on the ground, she rushed over to help her up. "Oh dear, Lily, what happened?" Ethan, take her to the hospital. She got hurt while tutoring the kids." Helen shot me a guilty look. She knew I didn't like Lily, and she definitely knew Lily had feelings for Ethan. But as a mother, having someone admire her son made her secretly proud. And Lily had been tutoring Eddie and Ella, so Helen couldn't bear to ignore her now that she was injured. Ethan glanced at me. I gave him a slight nod. He immediately went to fetch the bicycle. Helen helped Lily onto the seat while Eddie and Ella followed along. Soon, they were on their way to the hospital. For now, I was the only one left at home. So I returned to my room. By the time everyone got back, it was already past midnight. I was sitting at my table planning a trip to the black market. "Wife, I'm back." Ethan rushed in and immediately reported what happened. "Lily broke a bone. Can you believe it? She just tripped and bam, fractured herself. She has to stay in the hospital now. Mom's staying with her, but she still wants." He paused. I looked up. "She wants me to go take care of her, right?" Ethan nodded. "She must be dreaming. No way I'd let my wife go look after another woman." "Yes, I'll go," I answered. This time, Ethan froze. "Wife, I swear I'm not interested in her. The moment she asked, I rejected her. Why would you go? She's nothing. Don't be mad at me, okay?" I reached out and poked his forehead. "I'm not mad. Really, I want to go." Ethan was confused, but there was one thing he knew very well. Always listen to his wife. Whatever she says is law. "Should I take you there?" he asked carefully. I nodded. Yes, I wanted to go because I still had a debt to settle with Lily Harper, a debt from a previous life. At the hospital, when Ethan and I walked in, both Lily and Helen looked stunned. "Lisa, why are you here?" Helen asked. "I'm here to take care of Comrade Lily," I said calmly. "You and Ethan should go home." Lily's eyes lit up instantly. In her mind, Ethan must have begged me to come take care of her. She was practically glowing, so smug she nearly levitated. "Ethan, have you lost your mind?" Helen glared at her son, her look practically screaming. "Are you tired of living? How dare you let your wife serve another woman?" Ethan rubbed his nose awkwardly. "Mom, Lisa came on her own. Just go home with me." I looked at Helen. "Mother, please go back. I'll stay." Helen didn't know what I was planning, but she did know I wasn't someone to mess with. She quickly nodded and left with Ethan. Now there were only two people in the room, me and Lily Harper. Bop. Lily jerked her head up, eyes full of arrogance, right before my slap landed on her cheek. What are you doing?" "Who said I came to serve you?" I snapped. "You dare use that word? What do you think you are, a capitalist princess?" "No, I just meant you came to take care of me." Bop. Another slap echoed through the room. "I did come to take care of you," I said coldly. "But that attitude you showed earlier, I didn't like it at all." Lily Harper's eyes brimmed with tears as she trembled. "How can you hit someone just like that?" "I didn't hit just like that. I aimed very carefully before I slapped you." Lily's fingers shook with anger, but this hospital room really was tragic for her. She was the only patient here. It was already late, the doctors and nurses were resting, and she was completely alone. And clearly, she was no match for me. She sniffled pitifully. I snapped, "Don't cry, it's annoying." Lily didn't even dare sob out loud. "Hoo-hoo, my life is too miserable." Later that night, she needed to use the bathroom. She sat up, pushed me with her uninjured arm, and said, "Lisa, I need to use the restroom." "What? Want me to help take your pants off too?" Lily's face flushed. "No, I can manage with one hand. Your legs aren't broken." One hand is enough to pull your pants down. So what are you calling me for? I just wanted you to come with me. I'm a little scared alone, she whispered, eyes misty. I smirked. Fine, I'll go with you. I helped her into the bathroom. Lily thought that maybe I still cared about Ethan, so I was being obedient. I glanced at her, still smiling. 1 hour later, I shook her awake. Get up. Bathroom. Lily stared at me wide-eyed. Didn't I just go? It's my duty to remind you. I'm here to take care of you. Can't let you lie there and pee the bed, that'd be troublesome for others. Lily's face flushed red with rage. And that's how it went until morning. Every hour, I woke her up and made her walk to the restroom. By sunrise, her eyes were swollen like walnuts, her face streaked with tears. Now she was really crying. When the doctor came for morning rounds, Lily immediately demanded to be discharged. Honestly, her injury didn't require hospitalization anyway. Resting at home was enough. After getting the paperwork, she paid the fees herself and rushed to leave, not even bothering to wait for me. I shot her a cold glance. No manners at all. I returned home, changed clothes, then headed to the textile factory. From that day on, Lily Harper never dared step foot in the Thompson household again. She must have realized she couldn't beat me in anything. Couldn't fight, couldn't argue, couldn't outsmart, and once she gave up on Ethan, she married another man not long after. Word was, her husband was a drunk and a wife-beater. Good. Her taste in men was superb. Once work at the factory settled down, I took advantage of the employee benefits to buy several fabric ration sheets. I even had Ethan use his quota to buy more. After a bit of processing, I could sell them on the black market for a good price. Of course, whenever I went to the black market, I always dragged Ethan along. Only when he was tied to me on the same boat would he obediently listen. I remembered how in my previous life, when I tried selling things on the black market, Nathan Cole had nearly dragged me straight to the police station. He said I was breaking the law. If his mother hadn't cried and begged, I probably would have been jailed. Public duty over personal affection. Thinking of the past, I glanced at Ethan walking beside me, carrying a heavy bag, my lips curled upward. After just 2 runs, we earned over 100 yuan. Ethan's eyes sparkled. Wife, we actually profited this much. But we can't do this often, I reminded him. We make a big run only when the chance is good. When policies loosen, we'll head south and buy goods to bring back and sell. Whatever you say, I'll do. You tell me to do what, I'll do it, Ethan replied obediently. During this time, we continued our nightly study habit. At first, Ethan thought that since he had already passed the exam to enter the factory, he thought that after getting into the factory, he wouldn't need to study anymore. Who would have guessed I'd drag him right back into it? Wife, we already have jobs. Why study, he whined. We have to keep a learning mindset. Only then can we seize better opportunities when they come. Even though he had no idea what opportunities I meant, Ethan still obediently listened. In the blink of an eye, we had been married for 6 years. Ethan still slept on the wooden platform, and I slept on the bed. Because of that, we didn't have children. Lately, Helen kept hinting that the 2 of us should go to the hospital for a checkup. She even said she wanted to brew some old herbal remedies to nourish me. That was when Ethan stepped forward and said, "It's me. I'm the one who can't." Helen froze. She couldn't believe her son, her strong, tall, healthy son, couldn't. She insisted on taking him to the hospital. But Ethan refused. He had already admitted he wasn't able. If she dragged him to the hospital, wouldn't that be like forcing him to confess his shame publicly? Besides, how humiliating was it that after all these years, he still hadn't been able to climb into his wife's bed? Seeing his reaction, Helen almost completely believed something was wrong with him. From that day on, she treated me even more carefully, afraid I'd leave him because we couldn't have children. Time slipped by until 1977, when the college entrance exam was reinstated and the national policies began loosening. I pulled Ethan to study high school level material with me. I had already taught him through it twice. Once the official notice about the exam came out, Arthur Thompson told us immediately. Over the years, apart from not having children, the household had been peaceful. The Thompson family's elderly matriarch, Arthur's mother, had passed away at home. Arthur said she went peacefully, but the truth was far harsher. When I saw her body, she was covered in pressure sores from being bedridden too long. In the previous life when Grace Miller cared for her, the old woman had been spotless, not even an oil stain on her clothes. Yet staying with her own biological daughter had led her to such a miserable end. Soon, the exam day arrived. Ethan and I entered the examination hall together. Thinking about it carefully, we had been married for 7 years, yet I was only 25. After the exam, we compared answers. Ethan lightly held my hand and spoke in a low, soft voice. "Wife, are you planning to leave me?" He could feel it. Despite all the years together, I still didn't have the kind of feelings he hoped for. But he liked me, more and more with each passing year. Once, when he'd gotten drunk, he confessed. He said he wanted to stay with me forever, that he would wait until I was willing to open my heart to him. I looked into his sincere eyes. If I ignored the previous life, Ethan of this life really was worthy of recognition. He was 6'1", had solid looks, was obedient, brave, and learned fast. Under my physical training, he had improved significantly. But whether I should truly build a family with him, that I still hadn't decided. After all, I was about to enter university. The next 4 years would be the beginning of my major business plans. "Wife, whatever you do, you can bring me along. If you don't want to be husband and wife, I can just be your follower," he said carefully. "I know I used to be useless before, but that was because I hadn't met you. Meeting you showed me life could be different. Whatever you choose, I'll accept it." I stared at him for a long moment, then finally curved my lips. "You can sleep on the bed tonight." Thinking it through, how could I let another woman enjoy the man I trained? "Really?" Ethan burst with joy and hugged me tight. It wasn't easy. 7 years after getting married, we finally get to consummate the marriage. A month later, the exam results were released. Both Ethan and I were accepted into G University in G Province. Arthur Thompson and Helen Song were moved to tears because their household now had 2 university students. Arthur Thompson was even personally praised by the leadership, who said he raised his children well and invited him to give a speech about family education. He was so pleased with himself, he practically glowed everywhere he went. As for Helen, every time she stepped outside, her chin was lifted high. She bragged to everyone about having such an excellent daughter-in-law. Meanwhile, Grace and Nathan had already settled down in G Province. Word was that Nathan now held a very high position. He'd even risen to regimental commander. If we ever needed help once we moved there, he would definitely be able to support us. Over the years, Grace and I still kept in touch through letters. When she learned I'd passed the university entrance exam, she was genuinely happy. Hearing that Ethan also passed and would be attending with me, Grace couldn't help marveling that a man's fate truly changed depending on the woman he married. Nathan's career flourished because he had gentle, virtuous Grace by his side. She was well loved among the military housing community. Pretty, soft-spoken, and so sweet that even if someone raised their voice by accident, the other women would panic, afraid they had scared her. Nathan's mother adored her like her own daughter. Their mother-in-law and daughter-in-law relationship was harmonious, and now Grace had 2 children, a boy and a girl, living a full, happy life. At the end of August, Ethan and I arrived in G City. Grace and Nathan came to pick us up. Seeing Ethan and me noticeably closer than before, the smile on Grace's face deepened. "Stay with us for now," she said, squeezing my hand. "Once classes start, you can move into the dorms." "Thanks," I replied. "We're family." "Don't be formal," she said gently. "I'm planning to buy a house near the school," I told her. "If it's not absolutely necessary, Ethan and I won't stay in the dorms." Over the years, Ethan and I had made a decent amount of money through black market trading. This time when we moved, we brought all of our belongings, including several crates of goods we'd saved up. "Let me take you 2 to check out houses," Nathan offered. Ethan said immediately, "No need, brother-in-law. We can look around with Grace." But Nathan smiled politely. "I know people at the housing administration. With me there, the process will be faster." Amazing how simply changing his role made him so agreeable to talk to. After chatting a bit more, we settled into Nathan and Grace's home. The next morning, he personally drove us to meet his close friend who worked at the housing administration. There were indeed several properties available in the area I had in mind. I didn't hesitate. I bought multiple houses I liked, right on the spot. Seeing me buy property reminded Grace of what I had told her before. Housing prices would definitely rise in the future. She immediately discussed it with Nathan, saying she also wanted to buy a few units. Even though Nathan didn't understand why she suddenly wanted to invest in real estate, he always handed her all his allowances and mission bonuses anyway. As long as his wife was happy, anything was fine. Grace trusted my business intuition. Whatever I bought, she bought 2 more units nearby. That way, we'll still be neighbors, she whispered, holding my hand tightly. I nodded lightly. By the time we graduated from university, national policies had loosened even further. I decided to decline the job assignment from the school and instead begin my major entrepreneurial plans. Ethan chose to work at the Department of Commerce. The job would give him access to valuable information that could help me, and it had stable hours while being local. 2 months before graduation, I discovered I was pregnant. Ethan had waited years for this. When the news came, he nearly cried. He immediately became determined to take a job that would allow enough time to take care of us. Arthur Thompson had honorably stepped down from his position as the factory director. He and Helen were also brought to G-City by Ethan. My parents were starting to show many signs of aging. After discussing with Grace, we decided to bring my parents here as well. Since I had bought many houses, I gave one to Ethan's parents and one to my own. Grace tried to chip in money, but I refused. If you have time, just visit them more often. When I get busy, I won't always be free, I said. We'd known each other for years. She understood I wasn't being formal, so she agreed without insisting. When preparing to start my business, I went through my accumulated capital. The more I checked, the more excited I felt. Learning I wanted to start something big, Grace immediately handed me the savings book she'd kept for years. Lisa, you're good at business. I want to invest in you. Pay me profits later, she said. And what if I lose all of it? I asked. It's fine. Nathan said if we lose everything, we still have his salary to live on. You're showing off your marriage so boldly, you're rubbing it in my face, I teased, tapping her shoulder. Grace smiled softly. I trust you. I nodded. If you give me your money, I won't promise to double it, but I will promise you won't lose anything. From that point on, I was constantly running around, choosing locations, renting storefronts, sourcing materials, scouting places to build a factory. This era was truly one where, standing in the right wind, even a pig could fly. With over 15 years of future knowledge, plus what I learned in university and through my experiences in society, I was confident in the path I chose. As for Ethan, he remained exactly the same, following whatever I said without question. Helen had changed a lot over the years. When I first married in, I shocked her into submission. Now, even if she felt displeased, she didn't dare say anything outright. She simply kept it to herself. When she learned I gave up my iron rice bowl to start a business, she was irritated but didn't dare speak harshly. Arthur Thompson, on the other hand, greatly approved of my decision. Having just retired, he understood the country's development trends. My 2 directions for entrepreneurship were: 1. Open a garment factory. The southern regions were booming in clothing production, spreading nationwide. 2. Electronics. These would become increasingly important across all fields in the future. I had already bought 2 plots of land on the outskirts. The next step was handling paperwork. Ethan worked at the Department of Commerce, but he was still new. He didn't yet understand all the administrative procedures for business registration. So I decided to seek help from Grace. Her family's connections were broad. Nathan had comrades working in key government offices. As long as he said a word, Grace and I wouldn't have to run in circles. Grace brought me to see Nathan, who immediately arranged for his aide to accompany us and introduce us to several of his contacts. My documents were immaculate and the project plan flawless, so the Industrial and Commercial Bureau processed everything quickly. The Tax Bureau was smooth as well. Once everything was approved, the factory began recruiting workers. For the garment factory, I invited Arthur, who had just retired, to serve as factory manager. I also dragged Grace into helping. Though she hadn't worked outside in years, she'd been reading and learning continuously. Her mind was sharp. I trusted her ability, and with my father-in-law guiding her, she would eventually handle things on her own. When I pulled Grace into the factory, she looked at me wide-eyed. "Didn't you say you'd make money and share it with me? Why are you making me work?" I cheerfully pinched her cheek. "Your kids are older now. Aren't you bored staying home all day? Just come to the factory, stroll around, supervise things." Director Grace. After much coaxing, she agreed to work at the factory. All our designs were created by the two of us together. She had incredible taste. Her drawings were fresh and unique, the kind that caught everyone's attention at first glance. With more than 10 years of observing society between us, our garment factory quickly became famous across the province. After that, I began preparing to expand the market nationwide. But my belly was already big, and traveling was inconvenient. Ethan refused to let me go on business trips. Fortunately, Nathan introduced me to a group of former soldiers, loyal, capable, disciplined, and strong. I felt completely at ease in trusting them with the work. Over at the garment factory, Arthur and Grace managed everything well, so I didn't have to worry. My focus shifted to the electronics plant, where we had just brought in a new production line. Ethan and I had both studied physics in college, so we had some technical foundation and took charge of the technology side together. I also invited several classmates who were highly skilled to join us and gave them shares. Everyone was filled with passion and drive. Time passed until the day I went into labor. For several days, Ethan had taken time off to stay home with me. Wherever I went, he followed. Every time I mentioned going to the factory, he made such a fuss that I had no choice but to rest at home. On the morning of the third day, my belly suddenly cramped violently. Ethan saw my pale face and panicked, rushing over to scoop me up. As he ran, he shouted, "Mom, Lisa's about to give birth." Helen hurried behind him, carrying the bag we had prepared. We rushed to the hospital. They had already prepared a delivery room for me. I was taken straight inside. After 5 hours, I finally gave birth to a baby girl. Helen hesitated for a moment. I knew she had hoped for a grandson. The country was now enforcing family planning, and each couple was only allowed one child. Having a daughter meant Ethan would never have a son. But when Ethan held our tiny soft baby in his arms, tears streamed down his face. "Lisa, look at our daughter. She's perfect. I really have a child now. I'm so happy. I love our little girls so much." Though Helen was still slightly disappointed, as the baby grew day by day, white and round like a little cotton ball, she couldn't help loving her dearly. After my confinement period ended, I officially returned to work. Every morning, after nursing my daughter, I went to the headquarters of the electronics factory to supervise things. The explosion of the electronics market was an opportunity as fleeting as lightning. Whoever seized it would win. I had to capture the market quickly. Using my memories from my previous life, I immediately expanded distribution channels. I kept studying and researching trends together with Grace. Eventually, we even traveled abroad to survey the market. After careful research, we decided to import another production line. Our color TV brand gradually secured a strong position in the industry. Later, we expanded into radios, mini music players, 3-megapixel, 4-megapixel varieties, and more. Before I even turned 40, I had achieved financial freedom. Grace held 20% of the shares in both factories, and the profits she earned were enough to make anyone jealous. Nathan often sighed that he was extremely lucky to have married such a precious wife. Once, Grace teased him while holding his hand. "If you had married Lisa back then, would you be even richer now?" Nathan shook his head. "Lisa is brilliant, but she and I are too strong-willed. We're suited to be friends, family even, but not husband and wife. You're the one who balances me." He said it with such sincerity that Grace smiled, the last traces of regret in her heart fading away. Whatever happened in the previous life, in this one she had a loving husband, 2 children, 1 boy and 1 girl, and a complete family, along with a soulmate sister walking beside her. Her career thrived, admired by many. Truly, it was a life to dream of. My relationship with Ethan remained as steady as ever. He always listened to me, obedient and earnest. When our daughter turned 10 years old, Helen fell gravely ill and passed away. Before she died, the only person she wanted to see was me. Holding my hand, she whispered that she had dreamt a very long dream. In that dream, I wasn't her daughter-in-law, and she herself was a vicious mother-in-law. She murmured to me for a long while, then quietly left this world in her sleep. Looking at her, my feelings were complicated. There was a time when I hated her deeply. But later, because of my presence and because of Arthur Thompson and Ethan's attitudes, she eventually changed. We had lived together for so many years. Feelings of some kind were bound to form. Ethan and I arranged her funeral. Grace Miller came as well. She lit an incense stick for Helen, then silently stepped aside. I knew that at that very moment, she had finally let go of all the hatred from her previous life. 8 years later, our daughter was accepted into her dream university. Ethan took early retirement, and the two of us applied for our passports and began our journey traveling around the world. The earth is vast, filled with countless sights worth seeing, and we wanted to explore them all together. Everywhere we went, I sent postcards to Grace. We still kept our habit of writing letters to each other. 15 years later, Ethan and I returned to our hometown. Grace and Nathan were also retired by then. Our two families lived next door to each other like neighbors. Grace and I often took long walks together and talked about life, while Ethan and Nathan occasionally enjoyed a few small drinks, reminiscing about old times. Our old age passed quietly and warmly. In truth, this world had treated us very kindly. We were given the chance to live again, to grasp hope with our own hands, and to start life anew. That alone was already an extraordinary